Hello.
Are we ready to start?
Hi, Moby. Yes, Kayan is about to start. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our first webinar on the Not Fit for Purpose campaign. There will be two speakers tonight. Starting us off will be Brenda Madumise, who is the director of Wise for Africa, and followed by myself, Kayan Leung, who is from Lawyers for Human Rights. We are both members and part of organizations that support the Not Fit for Purpose campaign. And today's discussion is essentially to kick us off by giving us context of the history behind the council, where it comes from, which Brenda will eloquently lay out for us, and then followed by a brief presentation on understanding the gap between the NSP, what was envisioned, and what the current final National Council Act indicates. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Brenda.
Hi, good evening to all of you. And thank you for making the time. I know it's cold, but I'm hoping you're keeping warm. As Kayan indicated, I mean, the purpose of today is to just talk through the National Council that has got an enabling act, which is now law, that was signed into law last year, I think, in May, just before the elections. So we've got a law that establishes the National Council on Gender-Based Violence. But for us to do justice to this conversation this evening is to just take us on a memory lane of how did we get here to the point where we now have a campaign, Not Fit for Purpose, and why did we embark on this campaign at all? So you recall in 2018, we had the massive territorial shutdown movement and protest on the 1st of August with 24 demands. Those demands were self-explanatory. One of the key demands was that a national summit on gender-based violence must be, put together and must happen, which indeed happened the very same year in November. We had women and men across South Africa being part of that and shaping what then translated into a declaration. And that declaration is very important. And Kayan will speak to it later on. So we declared as government, as civil society, development partners, that we are going to establish a framework and a coordinating structure that will be predominantly a majority civil society leaning, right? So civil society will have more representation in that framework or structure that we're talking about. So it's signed. So once you sign a declaration, you're committing to those undertakings in that declaration, and you're saying this forms the basis of how we are engaging as partners in this journey. We then move on to once the declaration is done, there is an interim steering committee that is put together to assist in drafting what we now have, the National Strategic Plan, right? And that interim steering committee was its composition was civil society, government departments, and development partners, right? So, and I want to just to underscore that all the time and put it at the back of our mind that throughout this process, we had been working as a tripartite, and we brought in private sector later on. But throughout that process from 2018, it had always been that we co-create, we co-develop, we co-strategize on what needs to happen around gendered violence in the country. So that steering committee does the work, and it does it through consultations in the different provinces, because if we are to really untangle and wrestle with this monster of gendered violence, you can't leave provinces alone and just focus at national without any foot soldiers at the province and at local government level. And that's why there was a need to consult at provinces so that you take them along as provinces and have a stake in the outcomes of that national strategic plan. What was of interest, and I want to spend a few minutes on it, is that as we were looking at what is the best coordinating structure, because remember, what was coming out from everyone else and from that summit was that there has not been a properly constituted coordinating mechanism, just to ensure that the interventions and the responses on gendered violence are coordinated in such a way that are seamless, and we can start to see the impact that we are making. So we had multiple workshops just on the structure, multiple workshops. You had the UN Women proposing different models, and we really painstakingly went through all these models that were being presented, and for us to come up with a model that we thought can best deliver on the vision that we had, right? On how we ensure, one, a 360 approach that is all-encompassing, that involves every single citizen in the country, and a mechanism that literally deals and kills silo mentality and silo execution and silo planning. So this coordinating structure was meant to do that, was to pull everyone into one pot and make sure that from resourcing to planning to execution, it's done in seamlessly, and there is a proper way of all of us rallying behind that coordinating structure so that we are not all over the show. So that work gets concluded. We have a national strategic plan. We hand it over to government end of April 2020, 2021, I'm sure, 2021, all right? I stand to be corrected, but I think it's 2021. We hand over the national strategic plan with clear instruction and direction to government. This is a document that is the foundation of our work, right? But you as government, you take the lead in that. You must ensure that it gets operationalized, right? So once we give it to you, you're going to make sure that you popularize the NSP, right? Every single person in the country, whichever corner, gets to know about the NSP. You have the responsibility of ensuring that it is translated into the 11 languages that we have as a country, so that everyone has got a stake and a claim to it and can understand it and do their part and become upstanding citizen in ridding ourselves of gendered violence, right? And as you do your work as government, as you operationalize the national strategic plan, you also make the resources available to ensure that it's executed to its fullest, right? Unfortunately, that did not happen, right? So civil society kept on raising concerns around not having a structure, right? Because the structure has already it's through the declaration, it comes from the declaration, it goes into the national strategic plan. You know what needs to happen. What then transpires is we are told that we need to have another summit. And we are at a 3-year point at that point of the national strategic plan. So you take stock in 3 years of how you are doing, in implementing the NSP, and you have a summit, a second summit on gender-based violence, but very clear on the theme. His theme was about accountability, amplification, and acceleration, right? And I want to remind all of you, if you recall the president's speech, the first thing that he spoke about was apologizing about not having a council in place as required by the National Strategic Plan. So he says, mea culpa, I am guilty, and we are guilty as government for not doing what we were supposed to have done. But I promise you that we are going to be acting on it as soon as possible, right? And let me just take you back for a few seconds. As we were, the interim steering committee was working, we were then told that there's a draft bill. So around 2018, 2019, let's just say 2019, to be precise, is that 2019 Department of Justice says to us that they have a draft bill on the establishment of the council, and they have handed over that draft to the Department of Women. However, they don't share that draft with the interim steering committee, but we are told that there is a draft. So bear that in mind. In 2019, we are told there's a draft already establishing the council. We go to the second summit. The president of the country says, mea culpa, we apologize for not having a council in place, but we're going to do our best to ensure that we have the council. In the acceleration, one of the things that needed to be accelerated coming out of the second summit was the council itself. So the participants and the delegates at the second summit were very clear on accountability, and that in the absence of that coordinating structure, we are going to be found wanting around leadership. We're going to be found wanting on accountability, and all the other pillars that we are not implementing. So fast forward, we get to know, most of us saw an advert wanting to establish a trust from the Department of Women. And when there was pushback from civil society, because we wanted to understand, what is this trust now? I mean, that's a complete deviation from what is provided for in the NSP. Why would you design something that we don't understand and a trust? Immediately when there was pushback, that whole process was abandoned, right? And I suppose the Department of Women now started to be looking at what else, but nothing was happening. And I think a year or two ago, decided to issue an advert again, inviting people to make themselves available to serve as members of the council. So now a draft bill is also in place, and there is a call for people to show interest in this, and we had already started the campaign of agitating for things to move. And when we're seeing that there is government is lax and there's no movement forward and the needle is not moving, we kept on putting the pressure, right? And so after the second summit, when that was not happening, and then all of a sudden there is an advert calling for all of this, we were like, hold on. There's what we see is not what we agreed upon, and what is not in the NSP. So you can proceed with this council in this manner or in this format, right? But our concerns were still landing on deaf ears, right? To the point where the portfolio committee itself took over this process, started running with the process of council and advertising for people to make themselves available, and had individuals South Africans responded, and there was a shortlisting process, despite us through Lawyers for Human Rights as different organizations raising concerns about all of that. The portfolio committee went ahead to conduct interviews. These interviews were conducted over a period of 2 days, and a short list of individuals who were supposed to be appointed was done. And the last we heard was that the names were submitted to the office of the president for the president to pronounce. But remember, there was an intervening event, meaning in December last year, during the G20, the Purple protest happened, and government responded by deciding to classify GBV as a national disaster, right? And there was talk of putting together an advisory council, because we asked the question, so you're going to have this war room of some sort, or a net joins of some sort for this disaster, this classification. Where do you locate civil society? At that time, they were playing around with how they do that. They then thought of putting together an advisory body. So some of us were approached to make ourselves available. We asked very difficult questions on what is the role of this advisory committee? How is it decided upon? Is it the right? Now, so you have the list, you have individuals that are supposed to be members of council, but are members of a council that has been literally stripped of its powers and responsibilities, where it is now the way it looks with this new law. It's a act that really you have established an advisory body. It's not a coordinating structure ever again, as per the declaration. And I'm going to keep on reminding us that it comes from the declaration to the NSP, and the NSP is very clear on that, what that structure should look like and it should do, right? But it has deviated from all of that. So there is merit to us saying it's not fit for purpose. And it's not fit for purpose because it's not going to deliver on what we want, on what it should deliver on. So we're going to be here every year trying to get things going when you should have had a structure that is supposed to do that, but is not equipped to do so, right? It exists because, I suppose, for government, it's a tick box. We must all be happy that we have a council. Whether the council is going to deliver on what its purpose was initially, no one cares, but we do care that it has to do that, because we don't want to see ourselves in this position again. We wanted to have a coordinating structure and mechanism that is going to really address the silos, but ensure that resources are deployed correctly and deployed to interventions that can give us the scale that we are looking at, the impact that we are looking for. So in a nutshell, really, that's where we have been, where we are. And Kayan will talk to where we're going, and why is it that your support and your involvement is crucial. And the need for this conversation today is for us to engage further on how best to ensure that our demands that we've made for the many years that we have, we stay the course and ensure that this accountability that we talk about, that is escaping almost everyone in this country, especially those in government, is that we hold their feet to the fire, and that we don't tire in doing so. I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to engaging further. Thanks, Kayan, and thanks, Miriam.
Thanks so much, Brenda. So as we've already heard from Brenda, she has beautifully set out not only a timeline, but a visual of the events that have happened since 2018, which is that CSOs have been working alongside government and development partners on addressing devastating issues relating to GBV and femicide in our country. So let me start off by saying I'd like to apologize that my camera is not on, but I have prepared a presentation, and maybe it's better to look at the presentation. But essentially, the presentation is going to focus on one specific issue: the National Council on GBV, the legislation, and why a number of organizations and activists have expressed concerns that the Act in its current form is not fit for purpose originally envisioned through the summit process and the declaration and the NSP. So I speak today as part of the Not Fit for Purpose campaign, which has been involved in GBVF, in the GBVF movement, as civil society actors, and involved in the development of the NSP process over the past 8 years. Today's question that I want us to consider is quite simple. Has government created the institution we originally fought for? So to start us off, I'd like to just frame this discussion that our government has a constitutional imperative, which means it has a legally binding obligation, a positive duty, or fundamental requirement explicitly stated in our Constitution to take certain steps. And that includes ensuring that we need to have appropriate oversight and accountability coordination, which is not optional, but essential as part of implementing the NSP. That the Constitution imposes positive duties on the state, and that the right to be free from violence is guaranteed in our Constitution. Therefore, if we have ineffective institutions, it amounts to constitutional failure. We have the NSP. And to understand these concerns, we first need to remind ourselves where it started. And I'd like to echo what Brenda has stated, which is that the NSP was not drafted by a small group of officials just sitting in a corner office. They just decided, thumbs up one day that this is what's going to happen and this is what's best for everyone. It emerged from years of advocacy, national, provincial consultations across the country, mobilization and engagements. It was developed through provincial stakeholder engagements, public participation, and the sharing of lived experiences of survivors and communities that are affected by GBVF. What it did is it established 6 pillars that together form South Africa's national response to GBVF. And importantly, Pillar 1 focuses on accountability, coordination, and leadership. It was a central part of the discussions to say, we have had all these different plans in place in the past that have failed and have not worked. Why is that? Interrogating that to inform the development of the NSP. And the National Council is supposed to be the engine that drives the plan, these pillars. It's intended to provide oversight, coordination, monitoring, and accountability across the entire response. And in many ways, the council is meant to be the backbone that keeps the NSP functioning. So moving on to the next slide, what have we agreed to? When the NSP was adopted, there was a shared vision of what this council would look like. First, the council would have strong civil society leadership, which took on the form of 51% representation in this council. Second, it would be independent and capable of holding government accountable for responses and implementation on the NSP. Third, it would coordinate implementation across the departments and the sectors. Fourth, it would operate not only nationally at a national level, but it would ensure that provincial and municipal structures are embedded in the design process so that they're not brought on after the fact to say, please implement this. Fifth, it would support sustainable funding and resource mobilization for the GBVF response, because we all speak about costing and fully funding and ring fencing money for GBVF funds, that we're not moving around funds from government departments when it's an issue in the news and there's an issue, there's a lot of media attention on it. Now, this is important because our concerns today are not based on new ideas. These principles were already, again, agreed to through nationwide consultations, the declaration, the summit process, and was embedded in the NSP. So we assess the Act, the National Council Act, against the original plan, the history that Brenda set out. Next slide, please. So what has changed? And this brings us to the central question. Did the final Act, the current legislation, create the institution envisioned in the NSP? And next slide. This is ultimately what the Not Fit for Purpose campaign is about. The issue is not whether South Africa needs a national council. We absolutely do. The essential issue is whether or not the council established through the current legislation is capable of fulfilling the role that the NSP has envisaged. So our position to that answer is no. Not because we oppose the establishment of a council. In fact, many of us fought for the establishment of a council through these engagements. But when we compare the final legislation to the NSP and all the reports and the declaration, we see significant departures from what was agreed to. We see reductions in independence. We see reductions in civil society participation. We see accountability mechanisms being weakened and undermined. We see uncertainty around a funding mechanism for GBV responses. We see insufficient attention to provincial and municipal implementations. And this is where the Not Fit for Purpose campaign begins. Next slide, please. Our first concern is that independence has been weakened. The NSP envisioned an independent statutory body. It's also recognized that the president is the champion of national response. Now, this was intentional. The reasoning was simple. If the council is going to hold government accountable, it cannot be overly dependent on any single government department. And the NSP recognized that GBVF is a societal crisis requiring action across the departments and sectors. However, during the legislative process, we saw changes that increased ministerial influence and altered reporting arrangements so that the council now will report to the Minister of the Department of Women. We also saw a weakening of oversight functions. Now, this concern is not merely technical. It is the heart about effectiveness. A council cannot effectively hold government accountable if it lacks sufficient independence from government. Now, this principle is clearly established in multiple constitutional court decisions in different examples. The more dependent a council becomes on the very institutions it should be monitoring, the more difficult it becomes for meaningful accountability to occur. Next slide, please. Our second concern is that the role of civil society has been weakened. The NSP originally envisioned a model where civil society would hold the majority of seats on the council. And again, this proposed structure was deliberate. And this wasn't decided by civil society alone. There were engagements with government and the development sector in crafting the NSP. It recognized the critical role that civil society organizations, survivor-led movements, and activists play in advancing the GBVF agenda in South Africa. And many of the gains we see today were achieved through civil society and activists demanding change. However, this vision changed over time with the various iterations of the bill that became the law. Representation for civil society has been reduced and is now shared with the private sector. This concern is not just about numbers, it's about legitimacy of voice It's about accountability, and it's about ensuring that those closest to communities and survivors continue to have meaningful influence over the strategic direction of responses. And as many movements around the world have said, nothing without us, or nothing about us without us. Next slide, please. Our third concern is around the gaps in accountability. The NSP recognized that coordination alone is not enough, and that structures must be able to hold institutions accountable for delivery. And unfortunately, some of the mechanisms that supported accountability were either removed or weakened through the legislative process. The role of the Interministerial Committee has disappeared from the framework. Reporting arrangements have changed. Oversight functions have become less clear. And as of September in 2025, in the Portfolio Committee, they have documented that they're going to amend the council legislation to make the National Council an advisory body, as Brenda has indicated. Now, why does that matter? Because South Africa already has had many coordination mechanisms. The challenge has never been about whether or not there's a mechanism. It is about whether or not people are being held accountable for not holding meetings, whether or not they are implementing what they're supposed to be doing, what their mandate is. It's about accountability. So a council that coordinates but cannot effectively demand accountability and just make suggestions, essentially, risks becoming another advisory body that has failed. And we have seen this. The national gender machinery is one of those well-intentioned frameworks that have not worked instead of driving change. So coordination without accountability will not deliver results. Slide 9, please. So what starts to go wrong? These concerns did not emerge suddenly. For several years, there have been the warning signs, the various transitional structures that have struggled, the interim steering committee that was dissolved without an effective transition process, parallel structures emerging at different points, funding becoming fragmented. You'll recall that we have a GBV response fund, but that is a private sector-led fund which contains private sector-led funds. So the question is, where is government's funding in this fight? Because we read in the news that government has committed this billion, these funds, that funds, but nobody has ever been able to get a straight answer and hold accountable where those funds actually went or were spent on. And so when funds are not ring-fenced, they get moved around depending on the crisis that props up on any given day of the week. So a number of reports have identified the growing concerns regarding coordination, implementation, and institutional trust. Ironically, these challenges strengthen the arguments for a strong and independent council. But instead of addressing these weaknesses, many stakeholders believe the final legislation creates a council now that might work. But the evidence and the reports are pointing otherwise. And the current council, as its constitution, is going to struggle to overcome these challenges in its current form. Next slide, please. The fourth concern is around the lack of involvement of municipalities and provinces. The NSP clearly envisions provinces, provincial and local structures as an integral part of the GBVF institutional architecture. Now, this is because the implementation happens in the heart of communities where people live and experience violence. Survivors access service in communities. They go to local police stations, the clinics, local shelters. They interact with the local government systems. However, the Act focuses primarily on a national council and does not clearly embed provinces and municipalities in the way the NSP envisaged. It states that it will issue regulations, but this is now an afterthought on how municipalities and provinces will implement a localized version of the NSP into their plans. And this raises concerns about implementation, budgeting, planning, monitoring, and accountability at a provincial and local level. So if you have implementation that is weak at a local level, the very people that are going to be affected are the survivors and community members who experience violence, and they will be suffering as an afterthought of these consequences. So we need to remind ourselves, survivors experience services at a municipal level. They're not running to at a national level to say, please solve my direct issues and service issues. Next slide, please. The fifth and final concern that is fundamental is the question about where is the money? And that's about funding. The NSP envisioned a dedicated funding mechanism to support implementation that would be coordinated, and that includes government ring-fenced funding. There was a clear understanding that ambitious plans require resources. So without funding, implementation stalls. However, over time, we've seen that the vision of a dedicated GBVF funding mechanism becoming less and less clear. Nothing in the legislation speaks about the council trying to ensure that a government ring-fenced and coordinating funding mechanism will be realized. In fact, the private sector-led fund, the GBVF fund, is still ongoing because there's no certainty. And might I remind you, that was only intended to be a temporary measure until government sorted its issues out. So the question remains regarding sustainable ring-fenced funding for implementation. So while we welcome the private sector contributions, it cannot replace government obligations to adequately fund the national response. And the reality is simple. Plans without resources remain a piece of paper with plans. So if we're serious about implementation, then funding must be central to the conversation. Next slide. When we look at the different versions of the bill, between 2021 and 2024, a common pattern emerges, which is now the National Council Act. It's not just about one simple problematic clause. It's about a cumulative effect of multiple changes and a gradual reduction in independence of the council, a reduction in civil society oversight and participation. It changes the oversight mechanisms. And so while these changes in discussions seem small, significantly, when you combine it, it alters the nature of the institution. And so the council that emerges at the end of this process is not identical to the council originally envisaged through the NSP. Next slide, please. So speaking on the gaps, this slide then speaks about all the concerns that we have. When we compare the NSP vision with the final legislation, several significant gaps become visible. The NSP promised independence. The current structure offers more limited advisory capacity. The NSP promised strong civil society leadership. Our representation has been reduced. The NSP emphasized accountability. Those mechanisms have been weakened significantly. The NSP envisaged provincial, municipal embedded collaboration and reach. And it's questionable how that's going to look in practice now. We also anticipated sustainable funding mechanisms, and the question around funding remains unresolved. And this is the gaps that we have concerns at the heart of the Not Fit for Purpose campaign. Next slide. Is the council fit for purpose? And we return to the question we started with. The issue is not whether South Africa needs a national council. It's, can this council deliver the outcomes expected of it? Can it coordinate effectively? Can it hold institutions accountable? Can it drive implementation or ensure that there is survivor-centered interest in its governance? Will it deliver the promise of the NSP? And these are questions we believe require attention. Next slide, please. The Not Fit for Purpose campaign is ultimately a call for appropriate recognition that the legislation will not serve its purpose. It's a call to strengthen and not weaken the council. And we will continue to advocate for what was agreed upon in the NSP. It means stronger independence, meaningful civil society participation, clear accountability mechanisms, effective provincial and local governance structures, sustainable funding for implementation. Now, these are not radical demands. These are principles that were already agreed to. And so, in closing, the concern is not simply about a legislation. This has a knock-on effect on our NSP that we have co-created. It is about whether South Africa has created an institutional architecture that can respond effectively to GBVF. And that many survivors, activists, and civil society organizations have invested years into developing, to realizing this NSP and its implementation and the accountability framework. The concern is the important elements of the vision that has been lost along the way. Our message is simply that the council must not merely exist. It must be capable of performing its purpose. And unless the gaps that we've identified are addressed, there is real risk that this council will struggle to deliver any accountability, coordination, and leadership that's intended in the NSP. In closing, as part of the Not Fit for Purpose campaign, there will be a number of activities and events that will be rolling out for the next few weeks. And this is part and parcel of creating civic education, not only in civil societies and community-based organizations, but people need to understand what the issues are. What is holding up implementation? What is holding up accountability? What is holding up realizing tangible access to justice on GBVF in our country? We, as part of the legal partners, as part of Not Fit for Purpose, have prepared, just because of the years of engagement with government and not being able to get anywhere, have decided to now launch litigation, which will be filed in early August to challenge this legislation now. And the Not Fit for Purpose campaign will be asking a number of things from communities and civil society to participate and support this action. But more broadly, we need to be creating awareness on what these issues are, because again, we're not saying we don't want a council. We're saying we want a council that can do what it's envisaged to do. So we hope that we encourage you to engage with the Not Fit for Purpose campaign and follow the conversation. Read, if you want to, about the legislation and the NSP yourselves, but and join us in advocating for institutions that truly deliver on the promise for ending GBVF in South Africa. Thank you.
Kayan, there's some comments in the chat, and I don't know if you want to start taking some questions because we have about 15 minutes left. If anyone has questions, can you just raise your hand and so we can recognize you?
I'm sorry if some of the other teams can see any raised hands. Sorry, I'm joining from my phone, so my navigating is limited.
She needs to unmute herself. I don't know how to pronounce it. Borata?
Hi.
Can you please yes, thank you.
Hi. Good day, everyone. It's Horata. Thank you so much for this campaign, and also just acknowledging everyone in this room has done so much important labor towards this movement that we can't let really be appropriated or lost. My question is around the development of the protests and the shift led by Women for Change. And I wanted to know if Women for Change as an organization has a relationship to the Not Fit for Purpose campaign, if they've engaged in any way, what is their involvement and what has been their involvement given how much popular support they have. Thank you.
Brenda, would you mind taking that question, please?
Okay. So what we have been trying to do is to ensure that we work vertical and horizontal, and we work with almost every organization that is pushing the same vision and agenda that we all want. So Women for Change, we worked with them last year, and I'll give you an example of when they decided to embark on the purple protest. We engaged with them. One was to literally assist them to frame their demands in such a way that it doesn't water down the not fit for purpose campaign. So Kayan and Pinky, myself, engaged with Sabrina and other members of Women for Change just before the December protest, and they understood what needs to be done. And throughout, Sabrina and Women for Change did indicate that they will support our initiatives, right? So I know that the team from Not Fit for Purpose have reached out to them to be part of this, and I'll also reach out to Sabrina, because I mean I know her quite well, but I know that Miriam from Fit for Purpose and on the advocacy side have reached out to them for them to join. I don't think they're going to be opposed to that. I know they're frustrated, like all of us are frustrated, especially after that whole massive protest last year in December that led to the water down. Remember, it was not about government classifying. It was about government declaring it. So what did government do? Decide to water it down again, right? And decide to appease us and be performative and say we are going to classify it and confuse the hell out of everybody else, so that now we start asking questions. What does classification mean? And we had endless meetings in December with government with this classification to understand what it means. As of today, I think almost all of us have not had much on what is happening with GBV, government's responses since the classification, right? And many organizations have written to government to find out where are we. There's no response. We have been met with silence from government. Just to close it, really, is to say, I want to believe that Women for Change will form part of this campaign, and I know that they have reached out to them, and maybe Miriam can advise whether they were able to get them to join today, or if not, they will be joining all the other campaigns that will be rolled out as we move towards August, when we launch the papers and serve the papers on all the parties.
Thanks, Mabi. Yes, I did have a discussion with Sabrina. I'm just waiting for her to get back to me so we can have a formal meeting, hopefully sometime tomorrow. And I will then be able to give feedback in our next webinar that we should be hosting next week. There's 3 more hands in the chat. I think Amongo, followed by Lolo, and then Jess. Please unmute yourself and please ask your questions. Thank you.
Dumelang. Oh gosh, I think it's a pity that you said we only have a couple of more minutes to actually engage on everything and on your presentation. Can you hear me? Can everyone? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Monica. I've got, or rather, this for me is very problematic. What is problematic is that we've gone through the various different stages, or rather ways or mechanisms of protest when it comes to gender-based violence issues. We've done summits, we've lobbied government, we've lobbied private sector, and we've got all these beautiful documents well as established structures, which are failing, as you've outlined. However, what I feel, there are two things actually that I think for me, out of everything that I've written down, but there are two very important things that I feel should be at the center at this point of our fight in gender-based violence. That should be at the center of it is holding not just civil societies, or rather deployees of civil societies into these structures, is accountability. Where we've got these amazing people, once they get into these structures, like you said, it becomes completely diluted. However, I don't know if right now our language of protest can stop being on a national level. Municipalities and I've been fortunate enough for the past couple of days to be engaging directly with some municipalities and realize that there is such a huge gap. Sometimes there's not even a gap, there's nothing at all when it comes to issues of gender-based violence, or rather creating structures which will be held accountable. And I think the premise in which we need to start is by ensuring that during the IDP public participation, we have the structure that's supposed to be representing us on a national level come down to local level and speak and enforce and ensure that the IDPs in every single municipality, or rather our framework, is enforced and it's entrenched into the IDP directly, because the IDP is a programmatic response of what the municipality is supposed to do. And if we don't do that, then unfortunately, even still, those small civil society groups that we've got within our local municipalities don't exist. They're only there on Women's Day, where they have like those vouchers and sweets and cheap flowers, but there isn't anything that is tangible. Also, all of the people that have been deployed from civil society into these councils, how do we hold them accountable? Not just holding government accountable, but holding the very people who we've been through the struggle, hold them accountability, because it seems like when they get into these structures, they become comfortable. They become very comfortable in what happens and complacent and forget why we're there and why they're there. So how do we create features in our framework that we've worked for that ensures that the people who are there are actually come back and become accountable? And there should be particular principles that we need to lay down to say that these are the boxes, these are the responses that you need to ensure that they've been met whichever structure that you're sitting in, as people who've been deployed by us. And
sorry, Mongo.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. You had a couple of questions there, and there are other people waiting.
Yes,
so
yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just wrapping up. Like I said, it's a pity we've got such small time. But my issue is that how do we ensure that we need to have pillars that we sit down and ensure that the people that we have put into those structures come back to us and account on those various principles. I'll leave it. I'll leave it here. I think this needs to be unpacked, but I'm just going to leave it there on those two particular issues.
Thank you. Kayan, do you want to answer this, or should we get the other 3 questions before we move on?
Yeah, can we get the other questions first so that we
agreed.
respond
Thank
to it?
you.
Yeah.
Lolo? You have to unmute.
Oh, thank you. I was just typing that the host has to unmute me. First of all, thank you so much. I absolutely agree with what Umawongo has just said. I share the same sentiments. Good evening to everybody. I would love to send out great appreciation to the team and everybody who has been part of, doing the work throughout this entire period. and pushing back at government, including to where we are right now with the not fit for purpose, sorry. And also, like, just going back to the first, I forgot who it was that asked the first question around Women for Change. I think that it's so important that, and I appreciate that we actually that there was a communication with Women for Change, because one of the things that government has been capitalizing on since we started in engaging them from the beginning is they capitalize, and they always come back to us when we try to hold them accountable and say, Maranina, as civil society organizations, you are not united, right? And I think with what happened with the Purple Movement, the declaration gave them an opportunity and another gap yet again when the call to action and other groups who have been working with them and pushing back and doing all this work are trying to hold them accountable. Then they come back and say, Mara Women for Change did A, B, C, and D. I do hope that Sabrina and the team will actually come back and be part of this, because one thing that we need to do moving forward is really dismantle the silo syndrome within this GBVF movement and within civil society, because government uses that as a weapon to just not be accountable to us. That's the first thing. I absolutely also agree with Nonhlanhla that it seems like we are repeating this whole thing, symbolic freedom. Everything has been symbolic with government. And I really want to say kudos to the legal team that's working on the way forward right now. But my biggest thing is also to just want to find out, because I believe in just getting the things done. I understand there's more conversations and more, things that are going to be happening moving forward. And a lot of us in this chat are probably not involved in the, full-time engagements with the not fit for profit. So I would like to know, how do we, apart from following you on social media, is that where we can continue to get updates? I mean, some of us belong to other movements across the continent as well, who are also fighting the same fight and who are also looking at legal channels. And so how do we then support each other? And also for like the action that's happening on the 25th of July, what can we do to support this and make this happen? I think that's where I'm at right now. That's what I would like to know. But thank you so much for this work. And I hope that we can all get on board and dismantle the silo syndrome to make this happen, because it has hit us hard. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jess.
Hi, thanks so much, everyone. I will be quick. Again, thank you to everyone who's been holding this down, and just keeping tabs on the process and where it's been and where it's going and mobilizing us. For me, I do want to understand. I saw that Tando responded to my question in the chat. I don't know if Brenda and Kayan, you would agree with her response, but I would like to understand where you feel like things have twisted and turned, especially, I mean, I remember when the council, like, sort of advertisement, non-advertisement was first launched, and we were furious, and we made that very clear that this is not how this process should go. And I just wanted to understand from people's perspectives who've been very engaged, where do you think this this derailing of civil society leadership and accountability is coming from? What do you think the agenda is there, or what is driving that move? So that's my one question. And then I just wanted to say that I really agree with Umongo as well. I think that one of the things that has maybe been a weakness of the movement is that we have largely gravitated towards the national process and not really held provinces accountable. And there hasn't been, in my estimation, from what I've seen from my limited vantage point, there hasn't been a lot of agitation in relation to the implementation of the NSP in the interdepartmental committees at the provincial level, which have been set up and, EU funded to some degree, etc., over the last years. I feel like without that ground level, at least at the provincial implementation level, mobilization, we're not going to be able to get to where we need to go. And also, I don't think that the politicians will be taking us seriously, because we need to, my sense is that until the provinces are held accountable for their poor service delivery and accountability and follow-up, it's less impactful if national is even engaging.
Okay.
It has to be both. That's my estimation. So I would just love to hear what others think about that, or if there's anything in terms of the plan for Not Fit for Purpose in relation to more of a provincial level engagement. Thank you so much.
So
I think
quickly,
there's
I
one
think,
more
yeah.
hand, Marby.
Is there another hand? Yeah.
Yes, Mandisa.
Okay. Go ahead, Mandisa.
The bureaucracy of the unmuting was dealing with me. Okay, hi everyone. So my question is around specifically the fund. I get that we want to put teeth on the council, etc., but in the National Strategic Plan for Gender-Based Violence, there was always an understanding that we would have a fund, a GBV response fund that would be, I don't want to use the word similar to what Senec has, where government puts in funds, development puts in, partners put in funds, private sector puts in funds, and then we have a coordinated response for the GBV Council to basically, deal with. And it seems like more and more, as much as we're saying it's uncertain, the conversation around the fund, what it looks like, how it manifests itself, is drowning a little bit in this conversation. I just want to know, have we spoken to subject matter experts about what an ideal fund would look like? Do we have a model drawn up? Are we pushing I know we are pushing and advocating for a fund, but do we know exactly what that fund is going to look like? So that, again, because we've had to write plans for these people from day one, they are going to look to us to make a suggestion versus come up with a plan. And if they do come up with a plan, it's going to be a toothless plan. So what is our counter plan? I'll pause there.
Okay. So Miriam and Kayan, quickly, I think this point by Mandisa is, can we agree to maybe the next engagement is to talk about funding for GBV and look at the models that are available and what we had envisaged in the NSP with this gender-based violence fund, right? What is the model that we played around with to ensure that we have a GBV fund that is effective and responsive, right? So I would suggest that it becomes one of the rallying points and for this work that we are doing now, right? Then to Jess's point, I think Jess, let's understand the role of national and provinces, right? And provinces. There's what we call exclusive and concurrent, right? On matters such as justice, criminal justice system, it's all national competence, right? So and provinces will tell you that they get queue. And I mean, we can go deeper into the role of provinces, because for all intents and purposes, provinces are just post boxes. They're really post, but they get money from national and then go and spend that money on projects that they have designed themselves and all of that. So they're really, and the debate around whether we need provinces has been going on for a long time, because it's a very expensive cost structure currently in the country, and we can have that conversation. But we keep on engaging with those found in the provinces who are working in provinces, because they respond directly to the needs of communities in that particular province, but in the respective localities, right? So I think our emphasis should be in the various local areas, local municipalities, because that's where the interaction should be happening. To the point of what we think is at play here, I think there's a lot at play. for me, my observation over time, it has been, remember, for the ruling party, their default partner in matters such as these is the ANC Women's League, right? And then the second default partner for them is the Progressive Women's Movement, right? So when those parties are not driving the agenda the way that civil society has been driving, the ruling party tries to make space for them to do so, right? So they've tried to undermine the work that is being done by civil society precisely because their default partners are left out. So there was a big issue that the Women's League was very upset with us in 2018, if you recall, because in their mind, these things are supposed to be done by them, not anybody else, right? So there hasn't been that history that has carried throughout, even today. I mean, we saw it with the December protest, that when Women for Change was advocating for all of this, quickly, when the organizations invited to meetings to engage with government was ANC Women's League and the Progressive Women, because government's explanation was that those two organizations also had raised issues around GBV. And if you think about it, almost all of us around this call have raised issues of gender-based violence. We have written about we have called government out, but they were very clear and intentional in deciding that to engage on that particular matter at that time in December, Women's League and Progressive Women must be brought in. So it's you'll see the politics playing out in all of these things. There are meetings where they close out civil society and certain civil society organizations and individuals and invite people that they are comfortable with, and that has happened. So we are aware of this agenda, and what we need to do is to close ranks so that the divide and rule is not as fractures as they would like it to be. And I think what Lolo raised is all of us trying to get as many of us to close ranks and speak with one voice. And I think that's why this conversation today with not fit for purpose, so that all of us can rally behind this call, understanding what is at stake and giving and lending your support in it. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, and great questions. Maybe I'll try to respond briefly because I'm trying to respect everyone's time. Firstly, I agree with the comments that have been put forward. I think to build on what Brenda has said, we must find a way. So let me just reiterate, the Not Fit for Purpose campaign is not owned by any particular individual or organization. This is an invitation for us to collectively rally behind a common objective. And I think to Lola's point, and maybe just to share, on the 25th of July, so I think that's in 2 Saturdays' time, there will be a protest outside the Pan-African Parliament. And what is it about? It's essentially around another campaign which is happening, which affects all the countries on the continent, around a African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. Again, the name sounds catchy, it sounds promising. Essentially, the states gathering at the Pan-African Parliament are wanting to promote the ratification by the AU member states. But the protest is not rejecting efforts to end violence against women and girls. I think as feminists, we've spent decades fighting for stronger protections. But again, this issue is mirroring what's happening in the South African context on this council, which is that states are now advocating to pass bad laws, which actually regress protections and erode protections that have been advanced, weakening existing protections. And we're arguing that the Pan-African Parliament has a responsibility not merely to endorse legal instruments, but that they must be robust and rights-based and capable of advancing the dignity and equality and freedom of women and girls. So why are we promoting legislation that undermines work that we have fought hard for? Why are we promoting legislation that actually backtracks on rights that we have fought and hard gained for. So the 25th of July is not only about the AU Convention against ending violence against women and girls, but we must link it to what's happening in the South African context. So that is one event that's happening. But further to that, because I'm also mindful of time, there is a town hall that is planned for next week. And Simonia, please remind me, is the date the 23rd or 24th?
The
But there is a
23rd.
town, the 23rd, thank you. So the coordinators are going to post on the social media that there is an invitation of a town hall to unpack more of these issues that we're discussing and give space to that. And then I think that point around the importance of including the municipalities, local government, and provincial, absolutely, that's why we put it in the NSP and discussed it, because having a plan that just comes from national to say, provinces or local municipalities figure it out without embedding the budgeting in the IDPs and without understanding what is required in the specific needs of their communities is going to fail. So why are we not having these conversations to begin with? So I think I'll stop there, but just to say and reiterate, and this is an invitation to everyone, we each have different strengths, but this is a collective effort to avoid any regression of plans that we have fought for over the past 8 years, but also to be awake that this is not only happening in South Africa. There are moves at different levels to create conventions and pieces of laws that will undermine the rights that we have fought hard to protect and advance. So I suppose it's an invitation for us to find opportunities to collaborate. And I think it's echoing a lot of the discussion that has already been paced forward. We are not claiming the space as an individual or an organization, but as a collective voice who are interested and trying to defend our rights rather than just complain about it. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kayan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was an introductory webinar to bring everybody on board with as we launch the Not Fit for Purpose campaign. We will be sending out all of the information for both the town hall as well as the launching of the legal papers that's happening in August. We will also be having an event to commemorate the anniversary of the total shutdown, as well as the Not Fit for Purpose on the 1st of August. So all of these details will be launched via all of the social media platforms as well as the WhatsApp groups. So just give us a bit of time. So before the end of the week, all of these details will be out. Just a reminder, I see there was a question about the date. It's the 23rd, which is next week, Thursday. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to working together again going forward. Thank you.